Hey, Seekers, and welcome back. I'm your host, Julienne Irons, and today we're continuing our love and relationship arc through the practical lens, but we're expanding the conversation just a bit. Because for a lot of us, when we think about relationships, we've been taught there's only one way to do them. One structure, one set of expectations, one definition of what's right. But what happens when we step outside of that? What becomes really clear is that it's not the structure that determines whether a relationship is healthy. It's how we communicate, it's how we set boundaries, and it's how we practice consent and emotional responsibility in real time. In this conversation with Dr. Kat Valentine, we explore non-monogamy and kink, not as something to necessarily adopt, but something to learn from. We talk about what these dynamics actually look like in practice, how people navigate communication and power, and what it takes to create emotional safety in relationships that require a high level of honesty and clarity. This is Perspective Shifts for Healing with the Hanged Woman, where perspective is power. Let's get into it. Hey, Seekers. If you're building a business and something feels off, like you're doing all the right things, but the momentum still isn't there, it might not just be a strategy problem. At Three of Cups Healing, we offer intuitive marketing solutions using tarot, energy healing, and heart-centered creative guidance. Because the way you feel in your business shapes how you show up, how you make decisions, and how you grow. We help emerging business owners turn inner alignment into outward momentum, so your business can grow with more ease, clarity, and intention. Seekers, if you're ready to build your business in a way that actually feels supportive, book a free consultation with us at threeofcupshealing.com. Your vision, your magic. Let's make it real. Together. That's threeofcupshealing.com. And now, back to the episode. Dr. Valentine, thank you so much for being a part of this episode. I'm so excited for a conversation. Welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Yes. So for listeners that are just meeting you for the first time, can you just tell us a little bit about yourself, the work you do, and what brought you into non-monogamy and kink?
Yeah, so I'm a therapist, and I did first get into therapy because I was inspired from my own journey. When I was a high schooler, I was coming out to myself and my peers and my family as queer, and I was struggling with that. So I went and
Mm.
saw a counselor, and they really helped me. And so that's kind of why I originally wanted to be a therapist. And then I kind of later on had my own journey of self discovery around kink and non monogamy in college as well. And had a little trouble finding therapists who were really knowledgeable of and affirming of those identities. And so I wanted to be that person for people.
Oh, I love that so much. And thank you so much for doing that and being a safe space for people who need it. That's
Yeah,
very honorable. Yeah.
thank you.
So before we dive in, can you help us understand the distinction between non-monogamy and kink? Like where do they overlap and where are they actually quite different?
I think it's good to just kind of give some basic definitions first. So,
Yeah.
kink is essentially BDSM, which is a small acronym that includes a lot of words. So it actually stands for bondage and discipline, domination and submission, and sadism and masochism. And there's a big spectrum of how much kink is a part of people's lives, from occasionally tying a partner up to having a 24/7 power dynamic where someone can tell their partner what to do at any point in time. And then non monogamy is also an umbrella term that refers to a spectrum that kind of goes from monogamish at one end to full on polyamory at another end. Both of them have a lot of diversity within them. And then also, there can be people who are kinky but completely monogamous, and people who are non monogamous but completely vanilla or not kinky.
So, Dr. Valentine, when people hear non-monogamy, there are often a lot of assumptions about it.
What do you wish people understood right away about it?
Yeah, well, first off, I think it's important to recognize that we're talking about ethical non-monogamy or consensual non-monogamy. So we're not talking about cheating. So rather, someone is approaching relationships wanting to be able to have sexual and/or romantic connections with multiple people. And so with the full knowledge and consent of everyone involved. They want everyone on the same page. And then second, in popular culture, I think non-monogamous relationships can be seen as less committed than monogamous relationships. And that's just not necessarily the case. That there are a lot of non-monogamous relationships that last for years and where people are prioritizing their partners.
And what are some of the biggest misconceptions about non-monogamous relationships?
One big misconception is that monogamy and non-monogamy are completely dichotomous, that it's either one or the other. But really, there's several different ways to be monogamous and several different ways to be non-monogamous. And so I think that it may be helpful to kind of break down some of the commonly practiced types of non-monogamy to just kind of put that information out there. Though be forewarned, people will define for themselves what different terms mean as well. So it's always good to have a conversation about that.
Yeah, what are some examples of that?
Kind of the closest to monogamy end, you have monogamish. So that is, often a couple that might have mostly a monogamous relationship, but with a couple of exceptions that they agree on together. So they might occasionally have a threesome with someone. Or, this is maybe where the kink comes in, where like one person has a kink that the other one doesn't share. And so they have, their partners okay to go to a kink club and engage in kinky scenes without any sex, and that's okay. And so that's monogamish, where it's like mostly a monogamous relationship, but a little bit of spice in there somewhere.
A little bit of seasoning in there.
And then next we have swingers. And so these are, again, people who are going to be romantically monogamous, but are sexually non monogamous. So they may go to swingers clubs where you often have couples coming in together and then having some sort of sex with other couples. And sometimes it can happen outside of clubs too, but it's often kind of in a space outside of the home. So you might have meet up in a hotel room sometimes or something like that, but it is kind of separate from everyday life.
Is it true that pineapples in the more mature communities are a sign of swingers? I heard that recently, and I'm not sure if that's true or not. Tell me.
Yes, it is.
Yes, it is? Okay.
Yeah, I mean, not everyone who uses pineapples in their decorating knows that, but it is sometimes a like little signal from swingers to other swingers. And then the next category we have is open, so kind of, a couple with an open relationship. And again, this is a partnership where they're romantically mostly monogamous, but sexually non monogamous. But there's a little bit more of a gray area around developing emotional attachments with other people. So this might look like kind of having a main partnership and then friends with benefits apart from that. And so you might have people going on a date and having sex, but it's still, there's this understanding that the couple is the priority, and that the other relationships are not going to be prioritized in the same way. And then finally, we have polyamory, which is both romantic non monogamy and sexual non monogamy. And it is more of a life philosophy or relationship orientation for people. And so it's not something, so you can be polyamorous even when you're single. You don't have to have any partners. It's kind of the way that you approach relationships, rather than something that you always are entering into as a couple, unlike the other ones. So you can be single and be polyamorous in that any relationship that you enter into, you want everyone to know that you are going to have romantic and or sexual connections with other people as well. And so polyamorous people are typically not looking for one person to meet all of their needs in terms of, emotional needs and romantic needs. And also often have kind of a mentality of letting things develop organically. So, in a monogamous relationship, if you meet someone, if you're already partnered and you meet someone that otherwise you might explore a romantic relationship with, then you'll kind of wall yourself off to that. You're like, okay, let's not see them too much, or maybe don't talk to them too much. We can say hi, but maybe that's it. But when you're in a polyamorous relationship, then there's kind of, you're always open to those possibilities and kind of let each pairing become what it feels like it's meant to be.
That feels really freeing.
Yeah.
So let's talk about communication. What does healthy communication look like in a non-monogamous dynamic?
The first step to healthy communication is to figure out what you actually want to do in terms of your non-monogamous relationship. So a lot of people will create relationship agreements to kind of have a mutual understanding of what is this going to look like. And when creating a relationship agreement, you're often going to talk through and sometimes even write down, who it's okay to pursue a sexual or romantic relationship with. Are like friends off limits? Are family members off limits? Are coworkers off limits? What each person is okay with their partner doing, and also where it's okay to do those things. Like I was talking about with swingers earlier, they're often not going to do things in their home, but are instead doing it at parties or hotel rooms. The second step to healthy communication in non-monogamous dynamics is repair. And learning repair skills is something that anyone can do to improve any of their relationships. So I'll outline a couple of the important skills that can help. And, this is often something that people come to couples therapy for, is to learn some of these communication skills. So first off, the person who is upset about something that happened can try to first kind of describe what happened in as neutral a way as possible, and then talk about how that event led to them feeling. So, you might say, the other night you went and spent the night with your girlfriend and you didn't text or call me to say goodnight. And I felt a little hurt and a little abandoned by that. I know it's not something that we've talked about, but I was just kind of experiencing those feelings without expecting them. So then the next step would be the partner of that person reflecting back what they're hearing and helping that person feel heard. So they might say, hey, I'm hearing that the other night when I spent the night at my girlfriend's place, you were really feeling upset after I didn't call or text to say goodnight, and you were feeling kind of abandoned by that. I understand why you could feel that way, and I never want you to feel abandoned and hurt. And then the two people might talk about what might help the situation in the future. So, they might say, hey, would it be possible to have a text or call the next time that you're spending the night at your girlfriend's place? I think that it would really help me just feel a little bit more secure. If the other person feels like that's reasonable and is something that they are willing and able to do, then they might agree to that. So that's kind of the basics of repair, but you can obviously go much more in depth with that in actually kind of going through issues in a relationship and counseling. The next thing that can be really helpful for healthy communication in non-monogamous relationships is having regular check-in conversations. So you might schedule this weekly or monthly, particularly as you're first exploring non-monogamy together. And you can decide at each meeting like what you want to talk about that day. So some examples might be quality time, sex, other partners and friends, finances, etc. So then by having these scheduled check-ins, you can have this kind of assurance that any relationship issues that are coming up are going to be discussed at some point. There might be some things where it doesn't feel like a huge deal, but if it keeps happening repeatedly, then it's going to become more of one. And so a relationship check-in might be where that kind of issue comes up. That's not something that is leading to a big emotional reaction in the moment, but that you're aware may need to be discussed. Having those regular relationship check-ins kind of acts in a similar way to going to the doctor, or sometimes the function that therapy has of just like having a time and space that that issues will be addressed.
And how do people navigate these boundaries and agreements when more than two people are involved?
That's a really good question. And it's honestly one that often comes up when I'm working with non-monogamous couples, because that is where you often see some tension come up. So I think it's helpful to start by defining some terms. So a boundary is a standard or limit that you establish, which is applied only to you and is enforced through your own behavior in order to protect and preserve your own values. So a boundary in a non-monogamous relationship could look like, I don't have unprotected sex with people who have unprotected sex with others. And then an agreement in a non-monogamous relationship is a standard of behavior that two or more people agree to in order to build trust and predictability in the relationship. So an agreement on the similar topic could be that I will use barriers when I have sex with other people, though it's important that you talk through what sex means to each person. And that is something that's important that I've seen, is that if you are going to have an agreement, it needs to be sufficiently specific so that both people know exactly what conforming to that agreement looks like and what breaking that agreement looks like. And because oftentimes violations of relationship agreements do feel like a major blow. A violation of trust is similar to cheating in a monogamous relationship. And similarly, like some relationships survive that and some don't.
Okay, Seekers, I think this is a really great place to take a break. We'll be right back with the episode. Here's a perspective shift. Your business doesn't need more pushing. It needs alignment. At 3 of Cups Healing, we offer intuitive marketing solutions using tarot, energy healing, and heart-centered creative guidance. We help emerging business owners turn clarity into momentum and vision into action. So, Seekers, if you're ready to grow your business with more intention and ease, book a free consultation with us at 3ofcupshealing.com. Your vision, your magic. Let's make it real. Together. That's 3ofcupshealing.com. And now, back to the episode.
Now, I feel like I would be faced with this jealousy. So, jealousy is something that many of us associate with non-monogamy. How is jealousy actually handled in these relationships?
Jealousy is definitely something that comes up for most people that explore non-monogamy, but there are ways to figure it out, to handle it in a way that feels good. So ideally, jealousy is handled as information in the same way that noticing that you're feeling angry or sad can be handled as information. So it can be helpful to ask yourself, what is jealousy trying to tell me? Sometimes it might be, I'm feeling a little insecure and might need some reassurance from my partner. Sometimes it might be, I feel jealous that my partner is off having a good time when I'm not. In that case, you might think about how you can have a good time, whether that's like having a little spa night for yourself or making some plans with friends while your partner's on a date. And then sometimes it might point to an unmet need in the relationship. So you might see that your partner has a date night scheduled with their other partner every week. And while you see your partner more, it's always like cleaning the house together or just sitting in front of the TV. And so then it's like, oh, actually, I do need more quality time where we have our date night set aside so that we have couples time that's protected and special.
It's honestly like any relationship, right? It's just like any single relationship that you're part of.
Right. Yeah.
Like you do the outer work with your partner, but then you also have to do the inner work for yourself. But that's like any relationship.
Mhm.
Yeah. Ah, I'm connecting the dots. See,
Yeah.
Dr. Valentine,
Yeah.
I'm connecting the dots.
Just because you're in a monogamous relationship doesn't mean that you never get jealous too.
Yeah, that's any relationship. I love that perspective shift. So let's shift over to kink, because there is also a lot of misunderstandings here, right? How do you define kink in the context of relationships?
So there is a broad spectrum of what kink can look like in relationships. Some people might find kink after they've been together for a long time. Their sex life has gotten a little stale and they want to kind of spice it up a little bit. And so then they might bring in, some ropes to do some bondage. They might do a little sensation play. So that can be like ice or feathers or anything that just feels kind of intense, but in a pleasant way. And so, or maybe even, flogging or something like but it tends to be a little bit on the lighter end. And they might start going to some kink events where they're going to some kink parties and kind of exploring that together. And then for other people, kink is really a core part of their identity, where it is something that they feel that they need in any relationship or even any or most sexual experiences. So then they might have most of their sexual experiences involving some degree of kink rather than it being like a cherry on top. It's like the whole ice cream. Then there's also people for whom kink and sex are separate. And so they can really just enjoy kink on its own. And so they might enjoy bondage, domination, and submission, or pain play without any sex involved. And then any of these people might get involved with a local BDSM community, whether that's through munches, which are like places where there's no play happening. You're just kind of having a meal or having some drinks together and getting,
Networking.
yeah.
But that actually sounds like a good place to start. Like if you're interested, would that be like a good place to like dip your toe?
Yeah, and it is a good place to dip your toe, to like talk to other people who've been doing it for longer, to be like, what is this even like? What do you even do?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
And then you also have play parties, which are kink events happening in spaces where you will have like some flogging happening or a bondage scene. And so a scene is just like a period of time in which you're stepping into certain roles. So in a public space, that might be for 15 minutes up to like an hour. And, yes, there's probably a big overlap between kinksters and theater kids. So the scene.
I'm for sure a theater kid, so I feel like I'd have a lot of fun doing that.
Yeah, because it is kind of role playing.
Yeah, I'm like, yeah, yeah, I want to play. This theater nerd would have a blast. What are like some examples of roles that people play in these situations?
Sometimes you might role play as like a goddess, and so the submissive or bottom might be like your supplicant or your priest or priestess, and you might have some trials to make them go through. You also just have like doctor and patient is a common one, or like teacher and students. So like anything that you often see as kind of role-playing tropes you can explore in BDSM too.
And you called one a bottom and then the other one is called a top? Or
Yeah, so that is probably good to clarify now. So you do have like bottoms and tops and subs and doms, and those are slightly different. So bottom is, someone who is having something done to them, and the top is someone who is doing something. But a sub is someone who is submitting to the other person. So there's a little bit more of a psychological aspect there. And that a dom is someone who is dominating the other person. So there's a little bit of a power exchange that's happening there. And whereas with a bottom and top, there might be less of
I
that.
see. And are there any times when like the roles switch, like the top becomes the bottom becomes the top, or sub dom, dom sub?
Yeah, I mean, so a lot of people are switches, which means that they enjoy both sides of the dynamic. And it varies between people whether they are okay switching like mid-scene or whether they want to switch from like scene to scene with the same person, or whether they prefer having like different people that they do those things with,
Yeah,
you know?
yeah. Oh, this is making me think of this game that my sisters and I used to play called Nerd Popular. And like one person would be the nerd and the other person would be the popular person. And then like all of a sudden the nerd would become popular and then the popular person would become the nerd and they just like
Uh,
switch. That's
yeah,
the thought that came in my head.
I mean, that could be a
That could be a
scene, you know?
scene, right?
Yeah.
Oh my goodness. So consent is often talked about more explicitly in kink communities. What does consent actually look like in practice in these spaces?
Yeah. So if you go to a kinky play party, there are often explicit conversations around consent. And alcohol and drugs are often prohibited in these spaces in order to allow people to fully consent to what's happening. Kinky people call these periods of time the scene, as I mentioned. And so people negotiate scenes before they happen at kink play parties. And so what do they talk about in these negotiations? So they'll talk about like what is going to happen. Are we going to do a rope scene? If we're doing a rope scene, you know, what positions are okay? What are you okay with wearing? Do you want to wear everything you're wearing now? Do you want to take some of that off? What do you feel comfortable with? If you're doing an impact scene, that's the scene where there's some sort of pain play involved. So then you'll talk about like what implements are going to be used. So floggers or canes or a paddle or barehanded spanking, you know, so you're going to talk that through. Also, are you going to be having any elements of domination and submission in the scene? Or is it just going to be like we are equals, but one of us is doing things to the other? And then also, how are we going to touch each other? What's okay? Are there certain parts of your body you don't want to be touched at all? Is it okay for there to be kind of a sexual vibe to this? Or do you want to keep it just kind of about what's happening in terms of like tying up? Finally, like another important aspect to negotiating scenes in play spaces is having a safe word. So usually there will be kind of a dungeon safe word as well, is typically yellow and red. So yellow would mean, hey, let's check in, slow things down. You know, you might say it if you are like, oh, this is getting a little bit too intense. Can we switch implements or at least just kind of take it much more soft? Red would mean like, let's stop this scene. I'm just kind of overwhelmed and I just need to take some time and do something else for a little bit. And then you check in about that. You also want to negotiate aftercare. So how are you going to take care of each other after the scene? It's usually talked about in terms of the top or dom doing things for the sub or bottom, but doms or tops also need a little bit of aftercare sometimes in terms of just kind of having a little bit of a cuddle and kind of having a more normal exchange with the person. Other types of aftercare might be just like having a little snack or getting some water, just things to kind of bring both of you back to like a physiological calm.
So when it comes to power dynamics, how do people engage in those in a way that remains safe and mutually agreed upon?
Power dynamics are explicitly negotiated as well. So you might have some power dynamics in a 20-minute scene at a kink play party. And so those would be negotiated in the scene. So like we were talking about earlier, you might have one person who is playing a goddess and the other person who is their priestess. And you might kind of talk about what that looks like together and have that power dynamic for a very short amount of time. And then play partners have power dynamics too. And that looks kind of similar to a friends with benefits situation where mostly you're getting together specifically to play, and it might not be super often, but you are often going into that power dynamic for most of the time that you're together. So like you're meeting up once a month and you might have a little, maybe even up to like an hour of chit chat beforehand, but then you're getting into a dynamic for a couple of hours oftentimes. And so then you would negotiate what that power dynamic will look like. Over time, you'll have a little less frequent negotiation, but you might still have some check-ins. And you often will talk about afterwards of like, how did that go? How did that feel for you? Long-term couples might decide that they'd like some power dynamics in their relationship as well. And so then they would negotiate whether they want that power dynamic to exist only in a specific time or whether they want it to be there all the time, and what it will look like when it's there. And then if people do have a 24/7 power dynamic, meaning that the dom can give the sub orders at any time, it's usually within a relationship that is considered as serious as marriage. And so there's a lot of trust that's already built up that the dom won't give the sub a command that they really don't want to do at all. They will be checking in to make sure that the sub is happy within that dynamic. I think it is also worth acknowledging that within many non-kinky relationships, there are power dynamics as well. You know, speaking from personal experience, like I witnessed my parents where like they had a very traditional household where my dad was the one in charge. And so he could tell my mom to cook dinner any night or tell her to go get him a drink. Those are things that you see in BDSM dynamics sometimes. And she would never tell him to do that, and he kind of got the final say on any like family decision. It's not something that's totally foreign to day-to-day life, but it's just kind of taking ownership of like, I get to decide what power dynamics I'm consenting to.
Oh my God, that's it's so much like the man leads the household and the woman is like the house, wife or whatever. Oh my God, yeah. That is a dom sub relationship.
Like the whole like trad wife thing, it's really a dumb stuff.
That's the patriarchy. That's crazy. I never thought about it like that. That literally is the patriarchy.
Yeah.
And like a lot of religion too, like a lot of religious
Mm-hmm.
base or
Yeah.
religious focused couples are like that too, or the man is like the one in charge and the woman submits to
Yeah.
them. Oh wow, so fascinating.
Yeah. So it's like, you do you like that? Do you want that? Or do you want to have like a more egalitarian relationship? Or do you want a relationship where the woman is the one in charge?
Right. Because those are options.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Wow. Perspective shift. I love it. I love it. So, can you speak to the role of communication and negotiation before, during, and after these experiences?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I've talked a little bit about what negotiation tends to look like at kinky play parties, but it might be helpful to speak a little bit to what it does look like in more ongoing relationships. So people tend to have more specific negotiation about exactly what's going to happen in each scene early on in a relationship, and sometimes a little less so over time. But it is still good to confirm what's okay for each of you. And people who have experienced like trauma in the past may want to negotiate before the scene every time so that they know what's going to happen. And that's totally valid. And even if you're not negotiating before each scene, as I mentioned, you will often have kind of a debrief afterwards of like, what did you like about that scene? What did you not like about that scene? What do we want to do next time?
Now, across both non-monogamy and kink, boundaries seem to be foundational. What does a healthy boundary actually look like in practice?
I've talked about a little bit about what boundaries look like in non-monogamy, but I think it is looking at worth looking at what boundaries look like in kink too. That could look like anyone, dom or sub, top or bottom, saying that they're just not interested in doing X, Y, or Z activity. And actually, there are several yes, no, maybe lists online that are really useful. They have kind of a list of several different kinks, several different kind of sexual activities. And I think that can be really useful to kind of go through and say, like, what am I interested in? what am I open to and what is just like, nope, I'm not going to do that. And those nopes, those are your boundaries of like, that's just not something I'm going to engage in. And as you go through those lists, then you know what your boundaries are for yourself, and it's easier for you to communicate that to your partners.
Mm. And what about emotional responsibility? Because I'm a
Mhm.
very emotional person. I'm going to tell you that right now. I feel like I would have trouble with this. So, what role does emotional responsibility play in maintaining these kind of relationships?
So, in both non monogamous and kinky relationships, people do have an emotional responsibility to both themselves and their partners. So, it's important to be present with your own emotions and communicate them, not in a blaming way, but again, as information. So, it's important for you to spend some time with yourself to figure out what your boundaries are so that you can communicate those to your partners. And also, people do need to be checking in with their partners to see, like, are you happy in this relationship? Is the way that it's going something that is positive for you? And then if not, a couple can try to figure out what changes can be made to make it so that both partners' needs are being met. And if that's just not possible, then it is possible to kind of talk about, do we want to break up? Like, are we just not going to get our needs met in this relationship?
Just a lot of honesty has to be present for everybody to
Mhm.
feel comfortable and safe.
Yeah.
Yeah. And how do we learn to stay present with any of the discomfort, whether that's jealousy, insecurity, or fear?
This is a place where I feel like kink does have a lot to teach. So, kink says, what if pain is pleasure? What if fear was fun? What if jealousy is just telling me how sexy I find my partner? When you experience discomfort in kink, you notice it, breathe through it, and see if it changes in any way when your first reaction isn't to just ignore it or panic. And if it changes in a positive way, great. And if it doesn't, then it's time to communicate that to your partner and figure something out that is working better. But it's just kind of not allowing other reactions to come through by taking a little bit of a pause.
What do you think that monogamous relationships can learn from non-monogamous and kink dynamics?
I think can be helpful to talk about what monogamy means to you. Do you care if your partner flirts with someone else, watches porn, has romantic or sexual exchanges with AI? What relational needs does monogamy fulfill for you? And how might that inform your monogamous relationship agreements? People often kind of assume that monogamy means one thing, but it can mean different things to different people. From kink, I think it can be helpful to think about consent and power. So, whenever you're approaching a new sexual experience, it'd be awesome if you asked yourself what you're excited to do that day with that person and communicate that to them. And then, in terms of power, you can observe what power dynamics exist in my friendships, romantic relationships, workplace, family. Am I okay with them? And if not, what can I do about it?
That's really good. Yeah, that's really smart. I mean, really what I'm hearing is like it's making it so that we don't have to be stuck in any uncomfortable dynamic. Like we can work through it with whoever that partner is and find safety. Now, if someone is listening and has never explored these relationship styles, what's one perspective shift that could still support their current relationship?
Yeah, I think that looking at these different relationship styles can teach us about building relationships intentionally, whatever we might want them to look like. So, asking yourself, what stories has society or your family or your religion handed you about what your relationship should look like? And is that what you want for yourself now? And, if not, then what does your ideal relationship look like? And how can you bring your existing relationship a little bit more in line with that ideal?
Dr. Valentine, if there's one truth you hope listeners take away about communication, consent, and boundaries in love, what would it be?
The first step to communicating, consenting, and setting boundaries in love is to get to know your authentic self. And so, start observing how your body feels when you're experiencing something that you love, and observe how your body feels when you're experiencing something that you hate. get in touch with your embodied yes and your embodied no. And if you need help doing that, talk to a therapist, and they can also help you kind of get in touch with those things. And then as you say yes to the things you authentically want and no to the things you authentically don't, you'll find yourself in a beautiful, custom tailored life.
I love that. I just saw like a beautiful rainbow covering over my life. Sparkles. Oh, I love this so much. This was such a amazing perspective shifting conversation for a number of reasons. And I'm so grateful that you were able to sit down with me and talk about this. I feel like it's something that a lot of people, at least in my world, don't talk about. And to have the perspective shifts that you gave us today was really, really amazing. So thank you so much for being here, Dr. Valentine. Where can people find you if you'd like to be found?
ValentineTherapy.com is where you can find my therapy services. And then I also have Instagram at Valentine Therapy. And I'm currently working at Best Self Psych, but I am opening my very own private practice, Valentine Therapy, in May. So I'm excited to work with some new folks in California.
Yay! Oh, this is amazing. Dr. Valentine, do you feel complete?
I do.
Yay!
So what really stood out to me in this conversation is that no matter the structure of the relationship, whether you're monogamous, non-monogamous, whatever, what actually matters is intention. That's what makes it work. Clear communication, honest boundaries, and a true willingness to take responsibility for how we all show up, for ourselves and for our partner. But if y'all are listening and you're thinking, okay, I totally get it, but why do I keep showing up the way I do in relationships? That's exactly where we're going next. Seekers, in our next episode, I'm joined by Jessica Fern, where we explore the science of attachment and how our early experiences shape the way we bond, connect, and sometimes repeat the same patterns in love, no matter the relationship structure. Because once you understand the why behind your patterns, you can start to work with them instead of feeling stuck in them. I'm Julienne Irons, and this is Perspective Shifts for Healing with the Hanged Woman. If this episode inspired you, please like, share, and follow so we can keep the conversation going. Until next time, hang in there, Seeker.